Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, March 14th. Oh, that makes it Pi Day, right? Oh, I think I forgot that. All about that in the Morning Post. And I just wrote the Morning Post. Normally, I do that the night before, and everything is settled and in place. And I don't know. Last night, I thought it was Friday. Is basically it. And yeah, Justice correctly points out I still have the Skype bloops on. I had figured out how to mute that at some point, and then everything went kablooey as we started experimenting with Zoom. And now I think just to honor the death of Skype, we'll just leave the bloops on forever. I don't know. Maybe not. I'll probably figure out how to do it. And I think I might have gotten the advice, finally, made it through my head, and how to enable the music on Zoom so we can give the audio cue to Greg, which he misses, and I'm sure the music as well. And I don't know. I think we might be able to get everything straightened out at some point. I don't know whether we're going to end up landing on Zoom entirely, going forward. And I don't know what the Netroots Radio Network is going to decide either. There's folks there that have to work this out. I'm not super pleased with the audio quality of Zoom, to be honest. I don't know. I'm not certain whether anybody has noticed it. Probably by the time it reaches the stream, nobody notices any difference. I'll have to ask the engineers upstairs whether or not they notice any difference in the sound quality. It sounds like it to me, but it could be any one of the 15 things that I adjusted. Anyway, yeah, I think what ended up happening was, in my rush to try to accommodate Greg's having sent me a Zoom invite, just to establish the contact, they don't like to let you simply accept the contact and then go on about your business and then not have a Zoom call. It kind of funnels you into a Zoom call, which if you're not paying attention and you click the buttons in the wrong way, you end up finding yourself in a Zoom call. And anyway, I wasn't certain I had a Zoom account with the funny radio name in it, and I thought I ought to have that. I went to establish that, and then I realized, okay, I'm running out of time. The show's about to go on. I don't remember whether I have a KagroX account or not, but it appears I do. I don't remember the password. I think I know. I have some good guesses at what it might be, but it might be one of those auto-generated passwords, but it wasn't stored in the computer. So I said, all right, I'll do the quickie workaround, the sign in with some other source, sign in with Google. And that was a huge mistake. You can't do that. Of course, you start signing into things with Google, everything else you've ever signed into with Google, unsigns itself up. It signs out with everything. I think it also causes problems as between Microsoft things and Google things. I think that's part of the design. So everything went kablooey. So everything that had the passwords entered and I never have to think about them anymore, just, who wants to think about it in the minutes before a show, all blanked out. So then I'm scrambling for, what is my Skype password? What is my Zoom password? What is my this password? What is my that password? And I'm on the radio, and it's not even a radio. You know how it's going. So everything went kablooey, and all the preset things that I had set up so that the sound was the way I wanted it also went kablooey, and we're slowly putting those things back together again. Anyway, the federal government is about to shut down. And some of you may have noticed, most of the federal government, the good parts are shut down anyway. So today is the day, Pi Day, for whatever dumb reason, that they settled on to, this is the end of the current CR under which we're working on. And I guess that is a baseline fact that is probably necessary for everybody to absorb. It's like stating the obvious, but who pays attention to? Well, why is it that we have funding for the federal government? That's supposed to be in the background and not a question that you ask, because things are supposed to be taken care of a certain way. They haven't been taken care of that way for a very long time. But anyway, we're operating under a CR now. The CR expires today, the 14th, which means that 11:59 and 59 seconds is the last minute second, for which we currently have funding for the federal government. But what the hell does that mean? It depends who you ask and who you are. And, I mean, okay. But in general, the funding runs out tonight such that if there's no new CR adopted today, and presumably because it is a legislative measure sent off to the White House and signed, and it doesn't happen before 11:59:59, then the government shuts down, even if it just shuts down for a few seconds while Trump takes the cap off the Sharpie pen and signs the thing. If he does that, who even knows? He's a master of chaos. Anyway, that's the way it's supposed to work. Today's the last day, and where we left it, the House passed this CR, which also, by way of background, I should remind you, the House controlled by Republicans. That's not new. But passed the thing on a partisan basis with, well, no Democratic votes, save that of Jared Golden. And I'm not certain I'm not 100% sure that's a Democratic vote. But anyway, he's got the D after his name. That's enough for the newspapers to call it a bipartisan solution. But the thing you need to remember about the way that this one was passed is it was passed on a partisan basis. And as a result, it's a terrible CR. These are all the things that, and the kind of CR that the Republicans always wished they could have passed before, but they were in too much disarray, even though no one ever writes that in the headlines. And the Freedom Caucus wanted this, and the lunatics wanted that, and what's his name, Tom Massey wanted a different thing. And anyway, they couldn't get their act together enough to pass the CRs under regular order by simply banding together as Republicans and doing it. They should have been able to do that. That's the presumption of holding the majority, but they couldn't do it. So instead, because it is said Republicans tend to catch the blame for shutdowns. I don't know why some senators are forgetting that story right now. They think there's reason to believe otherwise this time. But anyway, so what they used to do is they used to try and, well, they did. They succeeded in moving continuing resolutions, CRs, under suspension of the rules in the House, which carries a whole slate of issues with it, one of which is actually relevant, which is that it takes a 2/3 vote of the House to pass it, which also means then you need Democratic participation. So if you're going to get Democratic participation and support for a CR to pass it with a 2/3 vote in the House, there's going to have to be some real Democratic input into the composition of the CR. It's going to have to read a certain way and have certain amounts of money in it for certain things, or else Democrats will say, then we won't give you our support and you won't reach 2/3, and then you'll have a shutdown, and you're worried that shutdowns will be blamed on Republicans, and they should be because you're in the majority. You're right about that. It will fall on you. So they concede ground on this, right? We'll give you things the way you want it. And that actually just kept contributing to the anger of the House Freedom Caucus. And increasingly, as this kept happening, they kept saying, well, we're less and less inclined to unify with the rest of the Republican conference and vote for a Republican CR, even though we keep saying we want that. We keep demanding it, and then Republicans produce it, and then they say, we want it to be even tougher, and the Republicans say, no. And then they splinter and then come to us, and then they untoughen it. And so anyway, they got their act together this time, and that's what Greg was telling us that Brian Beutler was writing about yesterday. They got their act together, and they unified more or less as a conference behind a very bad and, very unhelpful CR, and passed it and then ran away. It is a recess week next week for both the House and the Senate. I think both had recesses scheduled, and it looks like they'll take them, which is, not great. Anyway, so the House passed it and then left town early for their recess. That's a maneuver that's meant to signal to the Senate, we're not going to be here. It does signal to the Senate. Look around. There's no House. We're not going to be here to say, vote at the last minute to keep the government running if you send us an amended CR. So this is it. Take it or leave it. We're leaving town. You won't have us to come back to in order to get the thing passed by both houses if you change it. So it's an up or down vote. Take it or leave it, and see you later. So that leaves the Senate feeling jammed. But this is something that goes on between the House and the Senate all the time. They always try to do this whenever there's a recess available to them. To use, to leverage this way, and try to jam the Senate. And generally speaking, the way it usually goes is then the Senate throws its hands up and says, we got the filibuster to deal with, and you don't. We always have to get 60 votes for cloture in order to move things forward. You guys can do it by majority vote. You're the ones who should be accepting it our way. It's harder for our version to get passed. If we can pass it with 60 votes involved, not for final passage, but for cloture, if we can pass it with 60% threshold, you can muster 50%. And I've seen the House attempt this several times, and they send it to the Senate. Well, yeah, I guess to set the table for it, I've seen the Senate do this a number of times, far more often, and then send it and then adjourn and say, look, we got our 60 together. Here's the thing. It's not always with the CR, but with lots of other bills. Take it or leave it to the House. And I guess more to the point, I have seen the Senate do this even after having been sent something from the House, where the House says, that's it, take it or leave it, and sometimes even leaves town. And the Senate says, we don't do jamming. We jam you. That's how this stuff works. And they will amend it and send it back, and then they'll leave town. And then the House is stuck saying, oh, I don't know. I've seen when it's a mutual attempt at jamming the other, the Senate tends to come out on top. This time, for whatever reason, the House has gotten the Senate Republican leadership to agree. Oh, we've been jammed. There's nothing we can do. Yeah. So they've left town, and the Senate is now panicking. And now I guess the question is, Senate Democrats panicking, being faced with the question of, will we be blamed? Will Democrats be blamed for the shutdown if they don't go along with this thing and just pass it for, well, I guess you could say for the hell of it. If it was a clean CR, they might agree to do it, but two, they would have, I don't know, I guess then they would say, well, now people will know that there was really no reason for us not to go along, and if we don't go along, it's going to look bad. But the reality is that nobody knows what's in the CR. No members of the public know. It's, they printed it in the paper, but nobody cares. No one reads it. Similarly, they won't know about this one. So they're still they're overthinking things, which is what we'll help them do by overthinking it even more. The panic is, well, if the government shuts down, Republicans will say, well, the House passed the CR, and there was a majority for it in the Senate. The only reason it didn't pass is that Democrats stood in the way and wouldn't provide the votes for cloture on the thing. They used the filibuster. They filibustered the CR, and now we're closed because of them, which, that's a story you can tell. But a couple of things about that one. One, you can tell a story of your own. You could go out there and say, yeah, the CR is terrible. They kept saying it was clean, but that was a lie. A clean CR means just status quo. Maintain funding for everything that's got funding now with the same level of funding that it had before. Two, that's how CRs or clean CRs work in the normal times when you have an executive branch that understands that they don't have unilateral control over this spending. So in the weird situation we're in now, if you had passed a clean CR, the Trump administration might still have said, I see you've appropriated money for the Department of Education. Well, it's closed, so no, we're not spending that money. I see you've appropriated money for the Department of, I don't know, you name it, some other bureau. Well, I'm going to close that too. Or, I guess it could go the other way too. I see you've appropriated less than I want for the military. Well, I'll tell you what, more money is going there. I'll take this Department of Education money, for instance, and move it over there. We haven't seen that happen yet. But as you know, you've all learned along the way in the last couple of weeks about impoundment and what that means. And hopefully also come to realize that impoundment is not a thing. And the president doesn't have that power. They've got a name for it, but he doesn't have it. Like, that's weird, right? But I mean, dictatorship. We've got a name for it, not supposed to have it. But he's trying to take it anyway. So just the fact that it exists and has a name doesn't mean it's legitimate. Bank robbery, for instance, has a name, but you're not allowed to do it. Okay. Well, anyway, we've learned about impoundment where the president says, okay, the Congress says this should have money. Well, I say no to that money. And further, I say that we've sent the dodgy boys in there to download the list of employees and sent them all notices that they were fired. Yes, we'll have lawsuits about that. And then I ordered some people to padlock the doors and pry the sign off the wall. And, people may think that they'll vindicate themselves in court later on and that their division is still open and functioning, but you're not allowed in the building. You can't use your email, and all of your papers have been burned. All right. Does the Bureau exist or does it not? Existentialism may have an answer for us, maybe not. Anyway, so normally this is what's going on, but I guess what we may learn about is another budget function that the president does have, but it's under very limited authority: reprogramming. Wait till we learn about reprogramming. There's provisions of law that allow the executive branch, the various departments. So usually this goes along with you get the secretary's direction and recommendation here, and the president says, oh, okay, that's a great idea, but that's not the way things flow in this administration, or really in most administrations, but much less so in this one. Much less input from the secretaries. But what you can do is you can program a certain percent, I think it's like 5% of the total budget of this cabinet department, and take it and reprogram it and spend it elsewhere. There's lots of limitations. I think the percentage is very low, especially I think it may be differentiating, but they may have a different percentage cap if you're going to move the funds from one department to another. And I think the cap may be a little higher if you're going to spend on other priorities within the same department. You have more latitude. So we may yet see that. And of course, it's not like Trump sat down and studied the rules about it. And neither likely did the people who are advising him about it. But you're very likely to see soon, and not just with the CR, but probably all budgets going forward, Trump saying things like, well, you gave this department $1 million and you gave that department $2 million, and I preferred it the other way. So I want to take $1 million from the $2 million department and give it to the $1 million department. So in addition to impoundment, he'll also start reprogramming things, or just not even using those words. I don't know, give me $1 million. He might not care what the terminology is. I don't think we've run into that one yet, but you're going to start seeing that. And that's one of the problems with going along with this CR, of course. And why I told you at the outset that it was important to lay the baseline that we are operating on a CR now. So as I mentioned yesterday, and as I've been talking about on Blue Sky for the last couple of days, if you've been reading the newspaper and reading that the Department of Education is largely closed right now, you may have heard from your newspapers that USAID no longer exists, right? Or that thousands of employees, half the employees at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, National Weather Service, National Institutes of Health, etc., are all gone, and that grants from the National Institutes of Health to research universities, etc., are all frozen, or various other funds are frozen, right? All of that is happening. All of that is exactly what it would look like during a shutdown, for the most part, and all of it is happening with a CR in place, right? So when they say we got to pass this CR or the government will shut down, one thing you should keep in mind is we have a CR now and the government is at least partially shut down. Now, granted, it's different when it's the whole government or just part of the government. That's true. But given that the president and the dodgy boys have been turning off bits and pieces of the government and vast swaths of the government at will, and yes, there's opposition in the courts and elsewhere, but they're doing it and padlocks are going on. Would like to see that not happening, would be better confirmation of the rule of law. but those wheels turn slowly. So anyway, the point is that having a CR by itself doesn't do anything to keep the lights on with an administration that ignores the boundaries that are supposed to prevent it from turning the lights off. So I'm not super convinced of the efficacy of any CR, and that's one of the things that they should have been holding out for. Not that I think that there's any kind of guarantee that this administration could give anybody that would make them feel good about the prospect of their now recognizing the rule of law. But, that's kind of half the point. The urgency of passing a CR is different. It doesn't disappear, but it's different when you have a good reason and now, I guess, a short-term historical record to lean on in saying, I don't believe this law is going to be obeyed. So the urgency for passing it is less with me. It hits different with me, as the kids might say, right? I don't feel the necessity, given that you're going to disobey it. And I should also say I don't feel the necessity, given that there are parts of the government that even I think, that you think should be operating, and I even agree. Oh, the military, law enforcement, for the most part, various other key functions, sending out the Social Security checks, all of those things, which can be, quote unquote, deemed essential. The problem is that it can be deemed essential by the executive. So then it becomes a question of what does Donald Trump or his advisors think is essential, and what would they like to play with? Things that have been deemed essential in the past and that we've all mopped our brow were deemed essential in past shutdowns might not be deemed essential this time. That's possible. But anyway, so that plays into the calculus that people like Chuck Schumer are making, and there's a lot involved there too. I might actually read an article about this stuff today too. But this is all sort of top of the head stuff, historical background, and I don't know, technical understanding of what they're facing today. So anyway, they could easily say that, reminder, the House is in recess. They're trying to jam the Senate. But the House isn't dissolved. They're not gone forever. They come back after next week. Or they could come back sooner. I don't think that they will, but keep in mind, it's possible that if you don't pass this CR because it sucks so badly and you have no faith in the administration following the letter of it anyway, and no reason to think that's going to change, so you just say no to the thing. All right, the government shuts down at midnight tonight. At which point you can say, yeah, it's shutting down. And I don't know, the House seems to think it's time to, you play it up this way. I always say that a recess week is not a week off for the House. They don't usually just go on vacation. They usually go home and, have all sorts of meetings with constituents, whether that's actual, people on the street who want to meet with their congressperson and complain about things, or it's really, backroom meetings with high dollar donors, whatever it may be. There's usually some of that, at least, if not lots of that going on. Occasionally it's official travel, which can feel like a vacation, but, and sometimes it's just knocking off. Some people will do that. Now that Republicans are hiding from town halls, there'll probably be a little bit more of that, although it probably would tend to be a Netflix and chill vacation versus a go to the beach and hang out vacation. Anyway, that's not the issue. The issue is they're coming back after that. And the Senate could say, as the Democrats say, no, we prefer a 30-day short-term CR clean to give us a chance to negotiate a longer-term CR. And to negotiate, that goes back again to one of the things we laid out as foundational. Because Republicans passed this thing on a party line vote this time, there was no effort and no opportunity given for Democrats to have any input or influence whatsoever over this CR. So it's not just that it's kind of a bad deal on balance because Republicans wrote it, but what can you do? It's disaster top to bottom because they never bothered to ask Democrats for any kind of input because they didn't want to give them any because they don't need any Democratic votes this time. So it's as bad as it could possibly be. And there's been no negotiation whatsoever between the parties. The Senate is now handed this thing where supposedly, thanks to super geniuses like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and others in the past, they have preserved the filibuster because what was it again? It forces bipartisan cooperation, forces bipartisan discussions about things like, anything, including this CR. And yet there's been none. I wonder why that's the case. Now, how does it force bipartisan compromise? By being used. But it's not being used. So what can I tell you? You've been presented with an opportunity to demand that bipartisan compromise that Joe Manchin said you're entitled to, and you have not used it. That's yet another reason to oppose this CR, both substantively and on procedural grounds. After this break, we can get around to what those procedural grounds actually are. I know a lot of you are more or less up to speed on how that works. But if you are, the more up to speed you are, the more you may be confused, perhaps, although maybe you already did your study, as to how they think they can face a situation where they need to have a cloture vote on a motion to proceed to the bill, then have a vote on the motion to proceed, then debate the bill, then have a cloture motion on the bill, then vote on the bill, and get all of that done before 11:59 tonight. And the answer, if you've studied and you remember, is you can't. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue without reading any news whatsoever for 2 hours. There will have to be reference to news articles and primary sources fairly soon. But to set the scene again, we were just discussing all the background information that you need to know in order to understand what's going to go on today procedurally in the Senate. And many of you are already understand this thing. And it's been real interesting watching it. It's an interesting dynamic watching activist Democrats prevail upon Democratic senators to do the right thing, or what they think is the right thing in this situation. And most of the activists are opposed to the passage of this CR. Yes, they know that the government will shut down, but as we were hinting at the end, the House isn't gone forever. Now, the Senate is also scheduled to be in recess, I believe, next week. I hadn't even looked at that. I was mostly interested in what the House was doing, but I also have found out, I assume they're in recess, and the reason I assume they're in recess is I am reliably informed that Chuck Schumer has an additional incentive to pass this CR, which he has said he's in support of doing, which is weird, but, that's what it is. We'll discuss that later. He says he's interested in seeing this thing pass, and coincidentally has a multi-city book tour scheduled for next week. So he's interested in having this recess, which he's entitled to have. But I guess the optics of going on the book tour while the government is shut down are worrisome to him. Although the publishers should be calling him, because the optics of going on the book tour after caving in and passing this terrible CR, the optics of the tour for the publishing company are going to be terrible. Whereas the optics for the publishing company and the reception that Schumer might get at the various stops on his book tour would be very different if, yes, the government is shut down, and I'm not terribly happy that the government is closed and things I want to have happen and services I need from the government aren't happening, and you're on a book tour. But if you're on a book tour and presumably most of the people interested in buying your book and speaking to you at the book tour and going to an event like this are base Democrats, and you're engaged in a fight in support of the position that the base prefers, then the optics of the book tour are much better. The publishing company ought to be calling him about that. Do you remember that advance? Well, if it was Trump publishing, they certainly would. Anyway, among gentlemen, that is not done. And so therefore, there will be nothing happening in that front. So anyway, Chuck Schumer has either, and again, here we have to point this out. This is the thing I thought we would discuss a little bit later, but either it's just true at face value that Chuck Schumer has come to the conclusion that it's better for Democrats to pass this CR, punt until the next fiscal year budget comes up, and then fight there. I mean, you'll lose, but for whatever reason, he thinks this is the way to go. And I guess it's a kind of a corollary to the, if your opponent is hanging themselves, give them enough rope, get out of the way, whatever it is. Maybe I'm mixing some metaphors. If they're drowning, throw them an anvil, whatever it is. Get out of the way and let them hang themselves. That their CR priorities are so bad that the spending priorities themselves will become instantly offensive and apparent to the voting public, and they'll hold Republicans responsible. I tend to doubt that, but it's a theory. And it's a theory that was advanced in a slightly different context by more liberal, more progressive. Well, I mean, Chuck Schumer, generally speaking, is a fairly liberal and progressive guy, but the more activist progressive wings that said, don't lend them any support, but don't get in the way of them declaring their values and having to face the public with them. Yeah, to some extent, but this one really, there's also the opposing school which says, well, sometimes what's called for is a fight all the time on everything and slowing things down and demonstrating the seriousness with which you do, in fact, believe that this administration is out of control and that Republicans have fallen into line and are voting like robots. Anyway, you could fight about which approach to take, but a decision has to be made at some level. It's not a decision that they necessarily hand down to the entire Democratic caucus in the Senate, but it's often difficult to tell where the personal opinions, the personal preferences of the majority, or minority rather, it happens with the majority too, but where Senate leader personal preference takes over versus I'm doing this for the conference or caucus, depending on which leader you're talking about. And part of the job, and Schumer understands it and does it well, part of the job is to be the pincushion, the target, et cetera, and to take all the slings and arrows when the conference gets together, or the caucus, in this case, the Democrats, caucus gets together behind closed doors, all the senators, Democratic senators and independents who work with them. get together and work out what their preference is. If they can get it all together on one page, great, whatever. But they air all their opinions and differences. And what very often will come out of it is there's division. And it is sometimes said to be the job of the party leader to say, well, I'll cover for the division. That is, there are enough, if they come to believe that there are enough Democrats, with or without Schumer's additional vote, if there are enough Democrats who just believe it's worse for Democrats in the short term, in the long term, whatever, if this CR does not pass, and I intend to vote for it. I'm not going to stand here and get branded with shutting down the government, even though there's good reason to believe you won't be, but you do believe that. So you declare your intention to vote for the thing. Sometimes then the party leader will say, all right, I'm pretty secure in my seat. I don't know how long it is until he has to run again, but whatever. I'm pretty secure in my seat. I don't think I'm going to lose it over this. There'll be lots of people mad. There'll be lots of people calling for me to be ejected as Democratic leader. But so long as a majority of the Democratic Senate caucus understands that, one, there's division among the Democratic senators, two, we anticipate losing this vote and this thing is going to happen, then three, they understand when Chuck Schumer says, listen, I don't love this thing. In fact, I hate this CR, but I'll go out and say I'm for it. Everyone will be angry at me. They'll focus their attention on me. Some of you who vote for it will catch flack for it at home too. But for the most part, the activist base will be yelling, Schumer, you're spineless. Schumer has to be replaced. Schumer has to be dumped. Maybe it's true. But the role is to go out there and draw that attention and to take that fire and to lessen the pressure on the other members of the caucus. And because that's understood to be the role, they're grateful for it, so long as a majority of the caucus understands that and says, we want that to happen, and we want those services to be available to us in certain circumstances. Then they say, I will continue to support you, Chuck Schumer, as Democratic leader in the Senate, because you are fulfilling the role we asked of you. Even though you and I are going to vote on different sides on this very important thing, even though you are going to become immensely unpopular among the Democratic activist base because you're covering for others. And it's impossible to tell the difference. If you're willing to say the right thing, or the words that are necessary to convey the truth of how you're going to vote, it won't matter very much to the activist base whether you're doing it as cover or whether it's because you personally believe it. And you almost never will go out and say, I'm only doing this because cover. Because if you do that, they'll ask you cover for who? And you're in the uncomfortable position all of a sudden of not covering for people. You said you were going to cover for us. And now you're naming us and shaming us by telling everybody who you're really covering for. You need, regardless of what you think, if you're agreeing to be cover, you need to go out and say, no, it's not because I'm covering for anyone. It's because I believe it myself, even if everybody can see that you don't. Now with Chuck Schumer, he might. He could very easily, he could convince me that he believes that it's just better for Democrats to just let this thing go. I don't agree, but could he think so? Yes. So it's impossible to tell, but it's something you should keep in mind in the background. And that will help explain the situation in which Democrats dive out of the way, run for cover, cave, however you want to put it. The CR goes through. Activist Democrats are calling for Schumer's head. He goes on a book tour and protesters show up and throw precious eggs at him or something like that. He could have the most disastrous week ever, and yet he's not ejected as party leader in the Senate. The answer there is because that's what a majority of the caucus wanted him to do, and maybe even the whole caucus wanted him to do. On the other hand, if he goes back and everybody says, what the hell's going on here? And there's calls for leadership election. I mean, they don't have to wait until the next new Congress to do it. You can do it any time. But if it doesn't happen, if they cave and Schumer says he's voting for it and he does vote for it, and there's let's say a bare minimum of Democrats necessary will go along with the thing in order to move it ahead, whether that's 7 or 8 votes, I don't even remember anymore. I don't know that all the Republicans are behind it. I think Rand Paul is out, wandering around in the wilderness somewhere. So they may need 8. Anyway, if that happens and then they come back and then they eject him as leader, or there's murmurings of it at least, or if they ever get to a point where they have a meeting about it, then, that was his personal preference probably. And he wasn't acting as pincushion or practice target for the rest of the caucus. So all of that is going on in the background of all this stuff. So let's say you're up to speed on all of that now and are thinking about that, and you might just want to know, well, what's going to happen today? So I don't know, because as it turns out, it sounds like some of the vote schedule, the telltale signs of the expected vote schedule are not in evidence over on Congress.gov, where they keep a record of all of the votes. What should ordinarily be happening here is that the CR should have had. How do we get to a vote on the CR? Does everybody remember? First of all, the Senate does everything either by unanimous consent or by motion to proceed, right? So if you want to bring the CR to a vote, it's very tedious, I know, but the things you have to do are someone has to say, hey, Senate, I propose that we consider and vote on this CR because the United States federal government is about to shut down. Important stuff. But stuff doesn't land on the Senate floor just because everybody knows it has to happen. Somebody says, I propose that we do that, and they discuss and vote on that. Or they just say, we don't need to vote. We're all either in agreement or whatever. And someone will say, I ask unanimous consent that we take up for consideration this CR. One of those two choices is going to be made. Very often you start with the unanimous consent, just to be sure. And if somebody says, nope, I object, then you say, all right, unanimity now having been destroyed, the only other path to getting this thing to the floor is a motion to proceed to it. Okay, I move that we start debating the CR. Someone says, well, I don't think we should. Or I would like to debate whether or not we should debate, whatever the situation is. The motion to proceed requires a vote. But before they vote on it, the Senate rules are you get to have a debate on the motion to proceed. Do you think we should proceed to this thing? Or do you think we should do some other stupid thing or nothing or go home, whatever it is? In order to have that debate, of course, the Senate style, you have that debate, and debate can go on forever as long as there are senators who want to rise and be heard. And there are technical limitations to that as well. But generally speaking, the way things tend to operate in the Senate, that could go on forever. So because it could go on forever, the majority leader will usually file for cloture, right? You make a motion behind the scenes. It's not necessarily announced on the floor. It's just a paper motion, and you got to get a certain number of signatures, and it's very rarely an issue for the majority leader in the Senate to get the requisite number of signatures. If it is, then that bill wasn't going anywhere anyway. So you get the signatures, and you have to go through a little process. The cloture motion has to ripen, which means you get those signatures, you file it, you announce it, you wait a day, more or less, and there's weird rules about how you calculate the amount of time that has to pass. But generally speaking, a day has to pass unless you intervene in some other fancy way, which we can't explain right now. You wait a day, the motion ripens, at which point you can then call it up and say, all right, that motion that I made that we proceed to it, we've been debating it for a while. I've made now a cloture motion to end debate on the motion to proceed to the continuing resolution to keep the government open. All right, time for ripening has now passed, and now you can make the motion. All right, I've made this cloture motion. Let's vote on that. If the cloture motion, you know the rules of this, gets 60 votes, affirmative 60 votes in favor of cloture, then cloture is invoked. What has cloture just been invoked on? On the motion to proceed to the consideration of the CR. So you get your 60 votes, cloture is invoked. Now you have, well, not yet, but you're on the path now to forcing an end to the debate on the motion to proceed. Now you run into your first hurdle. Cloture rules are such that cloture having been invoked, you now have up to 30 hours of post-cloture debate before you get to that vote on the motion to proceed. Now, at this point, you can ask unanimous consent. Listen, this is ridiculous. It's a midnight deadline. I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the 30 hours of post-cloture debate. If somebody says, I object, you're stuck and the clock starts to run. And you can't then ask, all right, can we finally now vote on whether or not to proceed to the continuing resolution debate? Now that the 30 hours has expired, nobody can stop it at that point. You know, you can waste a little bit of extra time with stupid debate that gets overruled, whatever. You have your vote, and you don't need 60 votes at that point because cloture has been invoked, and it's a straight up or down vote on the motion to proceed. You vote, they get their majority. You've now agreed to the motion to proceed, which means debate on the CR itself actually begins. At which point there is endless debate permissible on the CR unless cloture is invoked. What do you have to do to invoke cloture on the CR itself? You file that same stupid motion. You wait a day for it to ripen. It ripens. You hold the vote. Can you get the 60 votes? Let's say yes, you can. Cloture is now invoked on the CR itself. What happens then? 30 hours of post-cloture debate. Unless somebody asks for unanimous consent to dispense with it and nobody says anything. Somebody says something, 30 more hours. 30 hours later, as they say in SpongeBob SquarePants, there would then be a vote on the CR itself, which could pass by simple majority, cloture having been invoked. Got it? So, if there's anybody who would object to dispensing with the 30 hours of post-cloture debate, then you could look to see 60 more hours of debate, give or take, before they ever pass this CR, which means what? Technically, government shuts down tonight. They're still working on the thing. 60 hours, they could choose to run the clock, 24 hours, keep the Senate floor open, so they minimize the amount of time it takes to tick off the 60 hours, et cetera, et cetera. But what? 60 hours is a lot. It's more than 2 days. And I don't know, I guess if I have to grab the calculator, it's 2.5 days, as a matter of fact. And so if they start debate today, if they invoke cloture, I think they have a cloture vote scheduled for this morning. Might even be happening now for all I know. And they invoke cloture. It's 2.5 days if they run around the clock before they pass the CR. So what's it now? Friday morning, Saturday, Sunday. So now we're talking about early or Sunday, Saturday to Sunday is 2 days. And then an extra half day. So late Sunday, they might be able to then pass the CR, send it to the president. Let's say he signs it instantly because he's not golfing in Florida, right? No, he would be. So whatever. The government opens Monday. and nobody's the worse for wear. So, I mean, it's very likely that they missed the deadline and the government shuts down for the weekend, which, of course, Elon Musk has told us innumerable times. It shuts down for the weekend anyway. It shuts down differently. You might be thinking, this weekend I'll go to a national park with my family and enjoy that. Sorry, folks, park's closed. Moose Out Front should have told you. There's no CR. But there will be by Monday. And so if your business is with a government office that you have to show up at and meet with somebody or somebody you need to call on the phone, you won't notice any difference because they weren't answering the phone this weekend anyway. Not because there's a shutdown, but because it's the weekend. So this happens fairly frequently. There's a government shutdown over the weekend and most people don't notice. And interestingly enough, that's the logic that Newt Gingrich told Republicans way back when they could rely on. People won't notice that the government is closed. But people do start to notice when the government is closed during the week or when they're closed for a long enough time that they run into a government service that they meant to take advantage of and it isn't happening. Anyway, that's how the blame game gets played. But yes, so what does that mean? That's why when people are now contacting their Senate representation and saying, do you oppose this CR? They're getting answers like, I oppose the CR and I will vote no on the CR. And people who are in the know about things like cloture then say, but will you vote no on cloture? And they say yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Or sometimes, unfortunately, some of these senators just ignore the question and say, I told you I am opposed to this CR. Yeah, but are you going to vote no on cloture? Listen, I'm going to do everything I can to oppose this CR. Yeah, all right. But are you going to vote yes on the motion on the cloture? Or are you going to vote yes on the motion to proceed for some reason? Sometimes there are many senators out there, and this happens a lot, where they say, well, listen, I oppose the bill on its substance and I intend to vote no on it, but I think the Senate should work its will. I think we should give people the chance to debate. That usually means either a yes on cloture or I may be a no on cloture, but I've heard that we have the votes to invoke cloture anyway, and so we're going to, so it's splitting the baby or trying to hide from the real consequences of the vote, hoping that most people won't understand the procedural minutia. And they can say, I told you I was going to vote no on the bill, and I did. But I voted yes on cloture. And had I not voted yes on cloture, there would never have been a vote on this bill that I oppose. And there's two ways to defeat bills that you oppose. One is to vote no against it and have a majority agree with you. That's not actually going to happen. Or you can not have a vote on it at all. And that could happen if you would vote no on cloture. But they won't answer whether or not they'll vote no on cloture. And if you find somebody who says, oh, I see, you're schooled in what cloture means and you understand all of that, well, yes, let me tell you then, I'm going to be a no vote on cloture. But are you going to be a no vote on both cloture motions? I know you really have to pursue these guys to the end of the earth, and it's really kind of annoying. And they get fed up with you and say, listen, I've answered your questions. Let me talk to some other constituents. And you can hardly blame them for things like that. But if you say, if they tell you, I'm a no vote on cloture too. Well, what if they're a no vote on cloture on the motion to proceed, but a yes vote on cloture on the underlying bill? Why would they do that? Dumb reasons, including that there are many senators who want to be able to hedge their bets this way. I'll tell you what, this group of 8 right here will vote yes on cloture on the motion to proceed, but no on cloture on the underlying bill. If you 8 will agree to vote yes on cloture on the underlying bill, but you want to tell your constituents you're a no on cloture on the motion to proceed, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'm going to cast, in the end, I'll argue to my constituents. I was batting 500 on cloture. That's not bad. That's enough to capture the batting crown if you make it to the end of the season, right? What can you do? I went 1 for 2 on cloture. You're going to hang me for that? But yes, because I know you work, I don't know for sure, but did you work out a deal that the other group is going to bat 500? Somebody batted 1,000 on this. I want that guy. representing us in the Senate. Yeah, well, you got no choice. That guy's from Vermont. He's not going to be representing you. Anyway, so there's all sorts of games that could be played, and it's quite annoying to watch. For instance, John Ossoff. I don't know how he's going to vote, and he may come out to be a hero, but I'm watching his communications shop try and handle the ignorant about the vote, the informed about the vote, the hyper-informed about the vote, and the incredibly, you're here listening to this crazy show in the morning, people who are following the vote. And, you know, I don't know whether it's on purpose or an accident or what, but Ossoff is being pressured, just like all of them. I want you to vote against this thing. He issues a press release. I'm out to tell you I'm a no on the CR. I totally oppose this CR. In fact, I demand that there be a vote on a clean 30-day CR so that we can have some negotiations. Because remember, he'll say, what you heard on the first 15 minutes of the Kagro in the Morning show, where, well, maybe it was the second 15 minutes, where we said there was no Democratic input on this bill whatsoever because it was passed on a party line vote and they intentionally shut us out of the negotiations. I demand the 30-day clean CR so that we can have some serious negotiations around here. He's putting the onus on the House and saying either come back from vacation and negotiate this thing or close the government for a week. Go ahead. You guys be on vacation while the government is closed. We'll be also on vacation. But it'll be your fault that we're on vacation. I don't know, right? So you could be doing that. So he puts out the statement and says, I'm a no on it, and I demand this 30-day thing. And, you know, wow, he said more than he was a no on the CR. He said he demands this other CR. Well, how do you get the vote that you demand on this other CR? Well, the bad news is that they think that if they deal with the Senate Republicans and say, tell you what, if we agree, we'll agree to give you the votes you need for cloture on the motion to proceed, on the CR itself, whatever, both, some combination. We'll find a way to do both. And we'll promise you that there will be the votes for cloture if you will guarantee us an opportunity to offer an amendment to the CR which substitutes the language of a clean 30-day CR so that we can have those negotiations, to which the Senate Republicans will say, you know what, I'm feeling magnanimous. Sure, you can have that vote. You will lose that vote. There's more of us than there are of you, and it will just take a majority to say nope to the amendment and then move on and pass the CR. Is that a win? All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio for hour 2 of still haven't read you any piece of news whatsoever, but a lot of it is swirling in the background. All right, so that's the question. Is it a win to say, well, I demanded, remember I told you I was demanding this? I demanded a vote on a 30-day clean CR. I got that vote, so it's a win, right? Well, I lost the vote. That's an L, but I got the vote. That's a W. Practical real world significance of having gotten the vote, 0. It lost. Chances of that vote passing at all, 0, because there are 53 Republicans in the Senate, and they're going to all, even the ones like Rand Paul, who may actually be himself opposed to the CR, he joins the Democrats. They have 52 votes, the Republicans, to pass the CR, so it passes, or the amendment fails, and then the CR passes. And again, practical real-world significance of having won the right to hold the vote, 0. And did they know that going into it? Yeah. So is it a win? They'll come and tell you, no, it was a win because, yeah, some people, and their experience isn't lying to them. Their experience is most people will say, yeah, well, what are you going to do? I mean, we don't hold the majority. Well, then you filibuster. What? Yeah, I didn't know about that. Some people did, some people didn't. Right. And mostly they don't care. They don't know. They understand it, but it makes their head hurt. When they love to talk about it, but not for 2 hours, only for 1, whatever. There's lots of gradations between normal people and what's happening here, right? A lot of levels. So Anyway, John Ossoff, right, he issues this press release and says, I'm a no on the CR and I demand this vote. All right, people say, I've heard about this whole cloture thing. I listened to this ridiculous podcast. It went on for 18 hours about how this works. I need to know from you, are you a no vote on cloture? So, they ponder, they stroke their chin for a little while, an hour passes, and out comes that statement, I'm against the CR and I demand a vote. And then they turn it into a graphic that they share on social media. This, I don't really know how or why people do. I know why people do this. And I thought it would be an easy thing to find out how they do it, but I just don't care to spend any time figuring it out. But it's a very popular thing to do on social media. To say, okay, I could just type right into Blue Sky, I am a no on the CR and I demand a vote on this 30-day thing. And you put it out there and it floats out there with the rest of the, posts. And it might do some traffic because I got a lot of followers because I'm a senator. But kind of the truth of the social media thing is that it's still kind of a visual medium. And so if I make a graphic card, essentially, and turn my typed in statement into a picture on a blue background with white type jumping out from it of my quote and send that around, that grabs more eyeballs. It's colorful, it's different, it stands out from the rest of the stuff that's in there. Really, even if you just attach, I think you get more attention for posts that have a visual element to them. And so you turn your typed thing into a picture of a typed thing and send it around, and that gets more attention. So they send around the picture of the statement of Ossoff saying, I'm brave, I'm a no on the CR, and I demand this thing. You ask the question, what about cloture? So now, next comes a post from the Ossoff communications shop saying, Senator Ossoff announces today that he is a no on cloture as well, and then attach it to the statement. But the statement and a prepared piece of art that puts his statement in typeface and all that stuff, and in bold and on a blue background, the statement still says, I'm a no on the CR and I demand a 30-day clean one. But now there's a comment on top of it that says, the senator also says he's against cloture. That goes out. People say, shoo, he's against cloture. And then some idiot like me says, are you opposed to cloture on both the motion to proceed and the underlying bill? And then the shop says, you know what, we should remake the graphic. Or no, and they didn't even do that. We'll put out a new statement that is a press release from the Ossoff press shop that says, Senator Ossoff is a no on cloture and a no on the CR, and he demands a 30-day thing, and they put that out as a press release. It's on paper, it's handed out in the Senate press gallery. Someone turns that into a photo as well, or they attach it, as a link and send it out from the press shop. So now there's something that circulates that says, here is a press release that says he's a no on cloture and a no on the CR, and it's all in one document. That's progress from, it's a comment attached to one document. The one document doesn't say anything about cloture. Here's a comment about cloture appended to this thing. All right, throw it all in one press release. Fine, out it goes. Okay, now it's all on one sheet of paper. That's helpful because I have my doubts about why did you attach this as a comment when you clearly have the ability to turn it into a big graphic arts card. Why not make a new graphic arts card that says the senator opposes cloture and the CR and demands a clean 30-day CR and demands to get a vote on that? Put that out. No, it's some hybrid weird. It's, okay, it's an official release. I believe you, but it's disconcerting that you guys can't be like, oh, these people want the full detail. Because once that thing goes out as a graphic arts card, I'm going to say to you, why did you bother with a graphics arts card if you're not going to also say, I also promise you to be a no vote on cloture on the motion to proceed and the underlying bill. I know it gets confusing. I know it's stupid. I know it's lengthy. But why not a graphic arts card that says, listen, I am totally opposed to this. There's going to be no help from Jon Ossoff to get this bad CR passed. I'm a no on everything. All the cloture votes, I'm a no. I'll be objecting to any unanimous consent requests, and I'm going to be a no on the final passage of the CR. But I am also going to demand that we get a vote on the 30-day thing if you really think, you want to plug that. But why is that a bad graphic arts card? I'm no top to bottom. I'm going to do everything I can, and I won't neglect to do anything that I could do in order to stop this CR, because the one they've proposed in the House is terrible. There's no participation, no help coming from Jon Ossoff to pass this thing. That's a fine art card. It probably gets shared more than I'm a no on, when people know that you're not pledging undying support for stopping this CR. It could be what he means, but he won't say it. Is it a bad communication shop? Is he really saying I'm going to be cutting a deal of some kind with somebody else to vote no on one of the motion, on one of the cloture votes, but not the other? I don't know. I got no reason to doubt that he doesn't mean no on everything. But if you're making an art card, make an art card that says I'm no on everything. That's all I'm asking. I know it's a pain in the ass. He may, may be a big hero in the end. And that's the other thing. You wind people up about stuff like this, and then they get furious about it, and then Ossoff does exactly what you thought he said he was going to do, and you're glad of it. And then next time somebody tells you this is what you have to nail down, you say, you said that last time, and Ossoff was fine. Well, was everybody else fine? I don't care. I live in Georgia. All right, fair enough. So you see what we're up against. And on top of all of that, somebody was saying yesterday, by the way, I went to congress.gov, and let's just do this now because we might as well use some primary sources here. Congress.gov, and I went to the roll call votes. Oh, I didn't even do that yet because there hasn't been a roll call vote. That's right. I went to I don't know, maybe they went to the congressional record. And you remember way back like an hour ago when I was telling you, suppose you want to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed. You're the Senate Majority Leader. You want that to happen. You will file a cloture motion, and there has to be sort of official notice given to everybody, right? You got to sign that petition, but then you give everybody notice, and you're waiting for the bill to the cloture motion to ripen so that you can hold a vote on it, and that takes about 24 hours, which means that if you're looking to hold a cloture vote today, you would have seen somewhere in the congressional record the introduction of a motion to proceed, or rather the introduction of a cloture petition on the motion to proceed. You would have seen that at some point. Probably, if you were holding the vote this morning, you would have seen that yesterday at some point. Or actually, you would have seen that on Wednesday at some point. Why? Because the 24-hour thing is that a 24-hour calendar day has to pass in between the day on which you introduce the cloture motion and the day on which the vote is held. So what you would do, if you wanted to minimize the amount of time, by midnight on Wednesday or 11:59, if at some point before 11:59 on Wednesday, you say, I'm filing this cloture motion, I'm waiting for it to ripen, and then calendar day Thursday winds itself down, then at 12:01 a.m. on Friday, you're allowed to say, I'm ready to, I'm calling up the cloture vote. It has now ripened. That's how it's done. Right? You need 24 hours and 2 minutes to make the thing work. Unless you ask unanimous consent to dispense with that or to consider the cloture motion ripe and hold a damn vote on it. Which ordinarily, if you have strong opposition to the whole thing, you will find you cannot get. Someone will. So all it takes is one person to object. Unless there is a very important to you, for some reason, recess scheduled, and you're up against the closure of the federal government, and you at least, even if you don't think it's necessary, respect the wishes of other Democratic senators who believe that they are right in being frightened for their political lives should the government close or should something not be done before a recess, the optics of which will be so bad, is coming up. So out of respect to them, you don't object to the unanimous consent request. Listen, we all know what the result is going to be. We've all gotten together here. The fact is that there are 8 Democrats who are willing to vote for. The Democrats will offer 8 votes for cloture on both of these things, and it is now a foregone conclusion. So we could all waste 60 hours standing around here before we get to the foregone conclusion, or we could get right to the foregone conclusion and everybody gets on the plane and have the weekend prior to this big recess that we've scheduled for ourselves. Extra time at home or wherever we're going. Now, do you want to delay the inevitable or do you just want to get right to the inevitable? And sometimes they say, inevitable is inevitable. And it was all going to happen by Monday. Regardless, I could waste my weekend waiting for it to happen here, or we could have it happen. And you could see where people would say, look, I oppose all this stuff, but I see the writing on the wall. Fine, I don't object to the unanimous consent request to hold the vote on cloture. Or there's another way of structuring the unanimous consent request. If you think you look too dumb agreeing to a consenting to a unanimous consent request to just waive the ripening of a cloture motion, the Senate Majority Leader, somebody else, whatever, can make a unanimous consent request. Look, we could sit here and wind the clock down and waste our weekend. Or you can agree to, we'll do it this way. I ask unanimous consent that we move immediately to the vote on the motion to proceed, at least, right? Or if you really want a shortcut, I move that we move immediately to debate on the CR, and that when the vote on the CR is held, that it only be deemed to pass if it musters 60 votes. In other words, you build the cloture motion right into the unanimous consent request and say, all right, everybody knows that if you can get to 60, it's going to happen. Everybody knows that you can force us to get to 60 twice. Everybody also knows that everybody wants to get the hell out of here and go on recess. And everybody knows that midnight is the shutdown deadline. And everybody knows that if we don't do it this way, we're going to miss the deadline. Although everybody also knows that even if we do miss the deadline, the government will open up again before anybody even knows this is closed because it's the weekend. But don't talk about that part. You want the 60 vote threshold? Let's only do it once. I'll grant you that. And let's not do it in the context of cloture, because if we do it in the context of cloture, what did we learn an hour ago? 30 hours have to run off the clock. And people, one guy, one objector, one woman, one non-gendered senator can force 30 hours to run off the clock twice. So here's how you avoid it. I ask unanimous consent that, look, we'll grant you the 60 vote barrier that you wanted, but once and only once. And if we hold a vote on passing the CR and it gets 59 votes and that's it, then it doesn't pass. We volunteer to accept a 60 vote threshold on passage of the CR, which normally requires just a majority vote because you've already invoked cloture, of course. But we'll just build it all. We'll roll. I ask unanimous consent that everything go out the window and we roll it all up into one. The 60 vote requirement, the motion to proceed, the CR itself, the 30 hours and the other 30 hours, all in one vote. What do you say? The practical minded among the senators says, I know where this is going. I know that there's going to be enough votes for cloture twice. I know that 60 hours can be ticked off the clock, but who cares? Eventually, this whole thing is going to pass. let's not be ridiculous about it and pretend we're going to win when we won't. Now, if there was agreement among the Democrats in the caucus that we're not, we aren't going to provide the votes for this thing, we can filibuster it, at least through this weekend, then they might not go along with the unanimous consent request. Or if they didn't care about going home for recess, or if they thought they could force the House back and out of recess, or if they thought that the optics were actually good, that the government was closed next week while Republicans declared a recess, whatever, then they could object to it. Will that happen? I am not sure. And as somebody said, I was going to begin this conversation with pointing out, somebody looked at the congressional record and said, what's missing from the congressional record is any notice on Wednesday of the cloture motion on the motion to proceed or on the bill itself either. Nobody has filed this thing. There's no ripening clock ticking. So what is that an indication of? It's an indication that they intend to at least ask for unanimous consent to roll it all into one or two votes and to put the 60 vote threshold on passage of the CR perhaps, or the motion to proceed perhaps, both perhaps, neither, I don't know. But somebody's going to have to make a motion for unanimous consent unless they intend to let the clock run down. And maybe they want to do that and then try to blame Democrats. I don't know. But so now it's a question of, you got to ask everybody, are you a no on all the unanimous consent requests? Well, I'd say so, except one of the unanimous consent requests might just be, can't we dispense with this waste of time and get to the inevitable already? And, I wish the outcome was going to be different, but it isn't. So I'm not going to speak up in opposition to the unanimous consent request. So by now, we may already know what the unanimous consent request is, and this all could be a giant waste of time. But you'll be able to explain it to anybody who, you think will tolerate it over the weekend. Isn't that great? Anyway, so that's where we are. That's where we stand. And now you know about that. Now I can get to another piece of information that I gave you yesterday that was confusing to me, and I think I described erroneously. The Anti-Deficiency Act. Very complex and stupid thing, and it is referred to as the Anti-Deficiency Act, but it is a web of various acts that have been taken at various times, amended along the way. And it's a very weird and complex bill, but generally speaking, I think what I should say is that I spat out a garbled and confused version of the Anti-Deficiency Act and what it is chiefly aimed at. And I gave it to you opposite, backwards. The Anti-Deficiency Act isn't chiefly a way for a closed down government to find ways to spend money anyway, although my recollection is that deep inside, in a very obscure and backwards and upside down way, there are a few provisions that actually, some exceptions to the Anti-Deficiency Act, and these are the ones that tend to get exercised more often than the actual Anti-Deficiency Act in the main. There are some provisions in there that say, well, there are certain governmental functions which can do this. But in the main, the Anti-Deficiency Act is not a way to make sure that the government is not deficient in funds, but rather anti-term of art deficiency. What was that at the time? How was that understood at the time that the bill was passed and named? It was basically a measure to say, all right, if the government shuts down, it shall be illegal, and this one actually has some teeth, it shall be illegal for anybody in the government or the parts that have been shut down to obligate, to enter into any contracts that would obligate the federal government to pay money, despite the fact that the government is shut down because there's no appropriations. It wasn't apparently clear to everybody that that meant you shouldn't sign any contracts when the government's not operating. And people were taking advantage of that uncertainty at the time in the late 1800s, on the premise that, well, nobody's going to want to deal with a government that enters into contracts and then says, whoops, I can't pay it. And I knew I couldn't pay it when I signed the thing. So out of embarrassment, can't we just pay this guy or this company or whatever that I entered into a contract and oopsie, I forgot that the government was shut down. There were people actually doing this apparently and obligating the government to pay by contracting for and receiving services on behalf of the government with a wink, wink. Of course, you'll get paid once the government is back up and running again. They didn't want that to happen. So when the government doesn't have the funds to do this thing, but you contract for it anyway, in the 1880s parlance, you were creating a deficiency, right? I've just obligated us to pay funds that we don't have. We're going to be deficient on that. Unless, of course, we ask people after the fact, couldn't you please obligate some, appropriate some extra money for this guy who I promised money to? Well, we're against that. We don't like when you create a deficiency. We will pass the Anti-Deficiency Act that says you can't do this anymore. So it's kind of like we're closed. But seriously, we're closed. But, and I can't turn it up, but this is now for me like 20-year-old research. But somewhere in there, I'm pretty sure that there are a couple of exceptions to that. Some of which are in the statutes, the web of statutes that make up what is now the Anti-Deficiency Act, some of which are external to it. But there are some instances in which you can go ahead and do that, and you can spend money even when the government is closed, even though the Anti-Deficiency Act says no. And so, I think those have been invoked more often than the actual Anti-Deficiency Act, and that's why I remember it that way. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But external to the Anti-Deficiency Act is the even more arcane sounding Feed and Forage Act, or Forage and Feed Act. I can't remember which one it is. I may actually have bookmarked it at some point. Yeah, Feed and Forage Act. You can look it up on Wikipedia, and I'll tell you what it is. You can look up the Anti-Deficiency Act there, too, but they won't get into the nuances of the stuff that's actually been invoked in the past to do the opposite of the anti-deficiency. But Feed and Forage Act, in case you were wondering, stuff like, well, if you close down the government and everything's closed, why does the military keep operating? And yesterday, the shorthand answer for that was because you can order them to. Why can you order them to? Well, one, that's sort of more in keeping with the understanding of the military mission, period. But legally speaking, the Feed and Forage Act of 1861. What was going on in 1861 that they needed this? See if you can remember. The Feed and Forage Act of 1861 is legislation passed by the United States Congress that allows the military departments, important in 1861, to incur obligations in excess of available appropriations. That sounds like something you might need in the case of, I don't know, let's say the end of available appropriations, like during a government shutdown. Why does the military still work during a government shutdown? Well, everybody knows the Feed and Forage Act is there. What does the Feed and Forage Act say? Well, you can incur obligations in excess of available appropriations for, clothing. That's not going to help very much in terms of, what about launching missiles? Well, hold on. Clothing, subsistence, fuel, quarters, transportation, and medical supplies. But I'll bet they'll let you do, some of the other stuff, like war fighting. Especially if you are imposing martial law during the war fighting. But anyway, that was the idea here. It authorizes also incurring deficiencies, remember those, for cost of additional members of the armed forces on active duty beyond the number for which funds are currently provided in the DoD appropriations. What does that mean? Well, that's a gentle way of saying, yeah, you can pay soldiers. Not only additional soldiers, but if you can pay additional soldiers, it's presumed you can pay the existing soldiers as well. And if you can pay them, you can pay them to kill people. And if you can pay them to kill people, you got an operating military. See? Feed and Forage Act. And that's one of the exceptions to anti-deficiency. So if you put it all together, even though they're two separate statutes, and at least in the case of anti-deficiency, that's actually several statutes, probably the same for Feed and Forage Act. It's probably been amended along the way. One of the deficiencies you can create is to operate the military. There aren't many more, although things like, in case you were wondering, Secret Service core operations around the presidency, et cetera, et cetera. They can't just shut that stuff down. There are several things that fall under the this sort of deficiency might be okay. Exceptions to the Anti-Deficiency Act. All right, time for yet another break. We're now down to one segment for me to read you actual news, but I don't know. I flatter myself that some of this stuff is actually useful to some of you, although maybe review for some of you. Maybe it's useful as a review too. And if not, then you've switched the program and maybe you're listening to music. Or if you want news and you can wait a half an hour and will allow me to waste another half hour of your time, you can always wait for Justice Putnam to take you through the news of the day on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. But you will understand the news that much better. Or alternatively, worse, because of what we've done here for 3/4 of the show. All right, there are definitely things I wanted to tell you about. We'll scramble to do that after this break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What about news, you might be asking yourself? Well, I don't know. We'll see what kind of time we've got to deal with that. But, what did I just undo when I was opening up Pocket? I hope I just, well, all right. Hopefully nothing. And let's go to it and see what news I need to offer you. There's an awful lot. And, golly, what can I tell you? Don't know that we're going to get to all of it. By the way, if you want like a really thorough rundown on all of the various statutory and constitutional obligations with respect to appropriations and how you can warp them, there are some very good CRS reports on the subject, which discuss the appropriations clause, Supreme Court interpretations of it, the Anti-Deficiency Act reprogramming mentioned earlier in the program. The Purpose Statute, the Miscellaneous Receipts Act, the Anti-Deficiency Act, the Impoundment Control Act, the, I don't know if Feed and Forage Act is discussed in this one. We go even further than these guys do. But you can see that there's like lots of things that hardly anybody ever hears about, mostly because they've been effective enough in warning people off of doing stupid things, but they become newly relevant again, sometimes for the first time in 100 years, because of the brazenness with which Trump is, ignoring the law. And you're going to say, well, I never heard of this, so I am ignoring it. I never heard of this law. Well, you haven't heard of it because everyone has obeyed it faithfully, more or less, for the last 100 years, because if you don't, society collapses, or at least, the role of the United States in granting, full faith and credit for all of its debt obligations, for setting the pace for the international economy, for being leadership of the free world, etc., all falls apart, and everybody runs away from us. So don't do it. And, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Up to and including yesterday, talking more smack about annexing Greenland and maybe Canada, sitting right next to like the NATO chief, I guess, some kind of NATO chief was visiting the White House yesterday, was the latest who got involved in the press spray situation where they sit down in those weird gold embroidered armchairs, I guess, in the Oval Office, and you're captive and you got to sit there and nod no matter how crazy what Trump is saying is. I don't know why people agree to these meetings, but they do. And there you are. And anyway, so that's news-ish. I didn't get to that one. But all right, let's see. The other things that I wanted to share with you, man, there's just too many. Let me share this one to you. Shutdown-wise, since we're talking shutdown. I have this from David Dayen over at the Prospect. Interesting angle on shutdown stuff. Federal workers return to the office. You know about that. Everybody was ordered. You got to go back to the 5-day thing, unless you're fired, in which case, no. In which case, you got to go to the court to sue. Oh, yes, that reminds me. One of the excuses given, it's got some validity to it. One of the reasons given by, well, I guess Chuck Schumer must have, did he go on Chris Hayes? Is that what I saw? And they asked, why are you doing this? Everybody wants you not to. And everybody says, hey, the government's mostly shut down anyway. What's the difference? And there's an answer. More of the government will shut down, including the courts, right? And so the story goes, well, if you shut down the government, the courts shut down too. And if the courts shut down, then the one place where there's some possibly maybe kind of sort of almost effective resistance to the various lawless shutdowns happening thanks to Trump and Elon Musk and the dodgy boys, then that goes away. And what are you going to do? All right, that's a thing, sort of, but not entirely, because do appropriations, congressional appropriations, fund the judicial branch, the federal court system? Yes. Are they the sole source of funding for the court system? No. Are they the vast majority of it? Yes. Are you saying me that the courts would have a means of operating even in the face of a government shutdown? Yes. You mean as though nothing had happened? No. All right, tell me. Well, all right, it comes down to about this. There's about, usually, 2, 3, depends, 4 weeks, depends what's sitting in the coffers. But is independent source of funding for the operation of federal courts that operates outside of the appropriations context. What is it? Court fees, fines, fees, etc. There are various types of collections that the courts make directly imposed on parties to litigation, fines, etc. All sorts of things. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough usually to operate for 2, 3, maybe more weeks. It depends how much they've been fining people and whether or not people are prompt in paying. But that's independent of appropriations. And so we are reminded from time to time when there's a government shutdown and it looks like that might last a little while, and it's very important to keep the courts operating, and it usually is, that yes, despite, there being no appropriations for the federal judiciary, there is some independent money out there. Is it enough to say that you can rest on that? But we don't know. We just don't know. And we don't know how much is in the coffers. Also, the judiciary can direct its operations independently to some extent, such that less important aspects of the courts might be shut off in order to preserve the limited resources that they have, that they get independently of the appropriations system, such that they might decide, all right, the courts that have to deal with emergency applications for temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, various other extraordinary interventions in order to prevent something horrific and with tremendous damages in the offing if the executive branch orders something stupid and illegal. So you might want to prioritize that. But that would likely mean, well, other federal cases, which are important, right? Don't make a federal case out of it. Well, it's too late. We've made a federal case out of this thing. So that's clearly important. Is it as important as dealing with Trump's illegal firing orders? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It depends. Case by case situation. So could you stretch things out? You could. Do you think that it's possible that if a shutdown is triggered and all bets are off in that sense, that Donald Trump would would he then flood the zone even more and try to stress the court's bank account to the extent that they eventually say, all right, we need to shut down now too? Could he stretch out the shutdown? He could. Will it be stretched out probably by the congressional recess by at least a week anyway? Yeah, it would. And that might eat like half of the amount of money that the courts have in store. So it may be very soon thereafter that the courts have to shut down, but you would have that time. And you'd even have a week left probably while Congress is back in session. The only question is, are congressional Republicans independent enough of Trump that they would say, we better get things back up and running, and in a way that has some Democratic input because it's scary for us not to have the courts? I wouldn't count on them for that. Is there any sort of provision for the courts to operate under deficiency in contravention to the Anti-Deficiency Act? Well, they don't need feed or forage, but there is somewhere, and I don't know where it lies exactly, some statutory justification for the Supreme Court continuing to operate. But I don't know what there is for the district courts or courts of appeal. There may not be anything. There could eventually come a time when those courts have to shut down as well. On the other hand, how do you enforce the Anti-Deficiency Act? You actually bring charges. Would the judiciary charge themselves or dismiss the case against themselves? Would it be a conflict of interest? I don't know. I'm not sure. I forget how the Anti-Deficiency Act enforcement mechanism works. It might be something that can be done by Congress itself directly, but then you might be talking about something like inherent contempt. Hasn't been done since forever, and they're not sure how to do it. But in Democratic hands, you would say they're not going to do that. In Republican hands, yeah, maybe. So there's something of a point to that. There's something of the point also to the other issue that was raised, which was, well, yes, Donald Trump is currently turning off large swaths of the federal government. That's true. But if we shut down the government, the whole thing closes, and he can then manipulate things that are ordinarily deemed essential services, like we got to have people in here to process Social Security checks so that doesn't stop. That's always a big fear with government shutdowns. And most presidents say, I will deem that essential. It's important to me, Republican or Democrat, to this point, that not be interrupted. Does Donald Trump feel the same way? He might not. He might say, yeah, routinely we deem these things to be essential. I do not. And people will suffer as a result. There are other things that they might say, well, this has never been deemed essential. At least we'll be able to put the screws to Trump that way. He wants this government agency to be operating, and it won't be. Well, guess what? He deems it to be essential. And if you think he's wrong about that, you could challenge him in court. Oh, yeah, right. Courts may still be open, but you'll really be stressing them to the max. All he has to do is start flipping switches and pressing buttons and deeming things essential or not, and you disagree, and you very quickly run into a situation where you say, maybe this whole thing sucks after all. Could be. Could you make him shoulder the blame for it? Yeah, maybe. But do you also, does he believe that public opinion follows ultra MAGA opinion, where they say, I love having my face eaten by leopards? He may be wrong about it, but he may believe it. I don't know. So there's lots to consider, sure. Meanwhile, another story about the way things work on the ground, somewhat micro level, that might be of interest to you in reading this. Not necessarily to do with the shutdown, though it certainly could have implications for the shutdown. But this is just about the illegal turning on and off of various parts of the government, despite there not being a shutdown. Federal workers return to the office. Custodial staff doesn't. Whoops, that's a headline for you. There are reports of clogged sinks, overflowing trash cans, and a lack of toilet paper, says David Dan, and here's how that works. I think you can probably figure it out for yourself. We'll read an excerpt from it and then perhaps jump around a little bit. Many federal office buildings have seen a surge of employees coming back from telework after President Trump's return to office memorandum, RTO, you remember that? But facilities budgets have not been adjusted to account for the changes. According to multiple federal employees, office workspaces and bathrooms in federal buildings are rapidly deteriorating, with overflowing trash cans, clogged sinks, an abundance of pests, and in some cases a lack of toilet paper and other basic products. How come every time Trump is president we start running out of toilet paper? The president issued his memorandum forcing all federal employees back to the office on the first day of his presidency, asking all executive branch agencies, quote, to terminate remote work arrangements and require employees to return to work in person at their respective duty stations on a full-time basis. And that's not the duty stations that are out of toilet paper, by the way. It's the DUTY duty stations. You children. The Office of Personnel Management, remember where they're vamping in front of the cameras and doing their side hustle as Instagram fashion influencers to 800 people. The OPM responded with guidance 2 days later based on false claims that practically no federal employee comes to the office. And that's ketamine high drug boy Elon Musk's fantasy about how this thing goes. But unfortunately, he shares that with the president. They both actually appear to genuinely believe that the vast majority of government jobs are no-show ghost employees. That's because they're very ideological, very stupid. It's a convenient conspiracy theory for them to lean on, and they live in red pill world, and I guess they really believe this. The moves not only reversed a 15-year trend toward more telework that was required by federal law, but screw that, but collective bargaining agreements that allowed for it. Screw that as well. OPM adjusted its guidance to account for this, but mainly to give a green light for agencies to break those union agreements. Like, all right, well, OPM issued guidance green lighting it. How so? I don't know. Well, the answer is OPM said, I want you to break union contracts. Well, all right. I mean, I guess that would be a green light, but I mean, breaking a union agreement, isn't that going to land us in court and in trouble? Yeah, but we're going to shut that down too. All right. Here we go. Still, it has taken time for agencies to set deadlines for return to office policies, and many have just started over the past 2 weeks. Remember, the gears always turn slowly. One employee at the Department of Transportation, which implemented its 100% RTO starting on Monday this week, said that bathroom maintenance has been sporadic at best. After this employee called facilities management to get one bathroom serviced, it took more than 2 hours, they said. That's not the worst I've ever heard, but they're supposed to be there and on site. Why aren't they? Another employee told the Prospect that an office at the Department of Labor, which actually mandated RTO back in December of 2024, was, and I'll clean it up a little bit, unlike the bathroom, effing gross. In particular, sinks are not being unclogged in a timely manner, and roaches meander around the buildings, which I'm sure Trump and Musk are like, great, good, it's going to make people miserable and they'll quit. When Trump mandated a return to work, it was thought that this was a pretext to demoralize workers by taking away benefits and flexibility, and it was, perhaps in the hope that it would lead to resignations. But the quality of the office experience itself may be adding to that. I don't know that they actually anticipated it, but they're happy to have it. CNN reported last week that some federal offices were not equipped with Wi-Fi or even electricity when workers returned to them, and in other offices had wires sticking out of their walls or unadjusted motion sensor lights that led to work areas going dark randomly. Consolidation has left often crowded workspaces, a problem when federal employees need to discuss sensitive or classified information, for instance. The General Services Administration provides custodial services to most agency office buildings. In other buildings, particularly labs or hospitals, the agencies themselves hire the custodial staff, though they might also do that through the GSA. A pricing desk guide from GSA highlights its offer of custodial services to federal agencies at rates comparable to commercial cleaning services for similar commercial general use office space, which includes 5 days a week service for trash removal, restrooms, lobbies and common areas, loading docks, windows, floors and carpets, snow and ice removal, groundskeeping, and integrated pest management. You forget that all this stuff has to go on, that some of those people are federal employees, or at least federal contractors. Close the government, start turning things off at random. This is kind of the stuff that happens. Things he didn't think about, like the artwork that we began discussing yesterday, which again, you should read about. But the needs were not as great, of course, during COVID, which is still happening, of course, when about half of all federal employees worked from home. Until Trump entered office, half of the nation's 2.3 million federal workers were eligible for at least telework, according to the OMB report of 2024, though those employees still spent approximately 60% of their working hours at their job sites on average. 1 in 10 federal staffers were fully remote before the Trump memorandum. Nobody appears to have thought to dial up the custodial needs for the return of those employees full time. The continuing resolution to fund the government is also a factor, the one we're working under now, with budgets locked in at 2024 levels. Facilities budgets are also tied to a time before the RTO mandate. One spokesperson for the EPA told CNN they were waiting for a full year appropriation before making decisions that support return to in-person work. GSA, no response to requests for comment, nothing from Department of Labor or Transportation either. The situation in the federal buildings mirrors the experience at Twitter after Elon Musk purchased the company and cut custodial staff who were unionized. Workers reportedly brought their own toilet paper to the job at that point. And I guess at this point we'll finish up the article. No excerpting. Expected reductions in force may at first glance mitigate some of the harms to understaffed federal buildings. The Education Department has fired a third of its staff already, and total cuts may reach half. The Department of Housing and Urban Development could lose half its workers. More than 80,000 at the VA also could get the axe, and GSA has let go hundreds of employees in stages, just to name a few agencies. But at the same time, GSA is seeking to terminate many of the government's office leases, potentially sell hundreds of non-core federal properties, and consolidate the government's real estate footprint. That would mean that remaining federal buildings are likely to be full of workers and therefore need full-time custodial staff. Meanwhile, good note at the end of this one, Donald Trump, the full-time president, golfed on 13 of his first 48 days in office. So, good note on the side of all of that. But yeah, that's a situation you probably hadn't imagined, although maybe you've been in a situation like that before, and so it occurred to you. What else might I share with you? Let's see. Gosh, there's a lot. Elon Musk continues to be crazy. In case you were wondering about his Nazi salute and where his sensibilities really lay, he has been enjoying trolling everybody by retweeting somebody's formulation of Holocaust denial. How do you like that? If you read just the first half of the comment that he was retweeting, or I don't know whether he made the comment directly or not. Hitler didn't murder millions of Jews. Now, if you leave it at that, oh my goodness, that's very serious Holocaust denial. But the trolly twist is Hitler didn't murder millions of Jews during the Holocaust. Public sector employees did. So just in case you thought that all of you public sector employees here are American heroes serving the public selflessly, the fact is you are, in his view, Nazi death camp commandants. So just hope you might enjoy that one for the weekend. Anyway, yes, I'll have to find you that one, but a note to self on it. And my note to self will be Elon Hitler. So that'll probably remind me of what I'm looking for, but why not get that mention out there? All right, another important development, and there are a million of them, but I'll go on the basis of ones that you might not have seen yet. Highly unusual, reports ABC News. Highly unusual, what is it? The White House halts FBI background checks for senior staff. We knew that was coming. We have discussed that in the past. I mean, it's still highly unusual. But what is it doing about it? It shifts them to the Pentagon, which is interesting. The directive came before Kash Patel was confirmed as FBI director, sources say, but everybody knew that that was coming. And then, of course, if you leave it, the background checks with Kash Patel, that's not great either. He's just going to start telling people, don't bother for my buddy and don't grant it for this one, and in fact revoke it for that one. Anyway, the Catherine Falders and Luis Martinez have put this report together for ABC News. The White House has quietly directed the FBI to halt the background check process for dozens of Trump's top staffers, because they'd probably fail, and has transferred the entire process to the Pentagon, sources familiar with the matter told ABC News. And that's a weird transfer too, right? I mean, you're talking about background checks chiefly for civilian employees. But I guess in Trump world, that might make some sense. Well, what we're really doing is checking them for national security purposes. And we think national security should all be under the umbrella of the Pentagon. The problem is, of course, they don't really have the mission for that. They got the mission for checking their own people, maybe. But I don't know what kind of provisions they have for the military to conduct background investigations on civilian employees. Seems a little weird. The directive came last month after agents tasked with completing the background investigations had conducted interviews with a handful of top White House aides, a standard part of the background check process. White House officials took the unusual step of ordering a stop to the background check investigations after they deemed the process too intrusive, sources said. Well, it's always been kind of intrusive. It's meant to be. The procedure typically involves extensive interviews as well as a review of financial records. That's their problem. Foreign contacts. They're also in violation of a lot of laws there. Past employment and any potential security risks like being high on ketamine all the time. The White House instead decided to transfer the background check process for the White House personnel to the Department of Defense. And the drunkard Pete Hegseth will be handling things from there on for them to complete the checks, sources said. A former FBI official told ABC News the approach was highly unusual. If any of this is true, and if you apply it to whatever has been historically in the remit of the FBI, then it would be breaking that historic longstanding precedent and highly unusual. This person told ABC News. It would be highly unusual if that was taken away from the FBI now, for whatever reason, and given over to DOD or any other agency. Yeah, it would be highly unusual. That's where we'll stop with this one. Just wanted to put that one on the record for you. I don't think we're going to get any answers as to what the F makes you think that they are qualified to do it. That's just not going to be in the purview of this article. And there's no answer. So, there you go. Let me throw one other thing out there, although I don't think we're going to be able to get through it, but another obscurity, this one uncovered over in Slate magazine. A dangerous new Supreme Court case could open the door to prosecutions for DEI. And they're going to try this. Leah Littman wrote this piece just the other day. I'm going to run through as much of it as I can before time runs out on us. It's no secret that the Trump administration has moved quickly over the past few months to dismantle diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs in both the federal government and in the private sector, where it's able to exert that influence, right? It's in a case that's flown under the radar and that I probably won't be able to pronounce. The Supreme Court may be about to hand the Trump administration its biggest weapon yet. Oh, no. In the fight against DEIA, the possibility of criminal liability. We're going to prosecute all these DEI people. The Trump administration has used various levers of governmental power to attack recent efforts to diversify institutions, which at its heart is an awfully stupid thing to do. We could spend an hour on that. The federal government has culled documents and policies to erase any mention of DEIA, sometimes leading to perverse results, as you've heard before, such as the Occupational Safe and Healthy Administration dumping worker safety policies, which is their actual mandate. But okay. The Department of Education circulating a Dear Colleague letter that illegally threatened schools that receive federal funding with loss of federal funds if they maintained DEIA programs, like even marking Black History Month is apparently enough for them. So what's going on? Well, let me jump down to the problem of pronunciation if I can find it. Many companies and corporations may not depend on federal funds in the same way that schools and healthcare facilities do. To get those entities in line, the administration will need something else, such as the threat of criminal liability. Strikingly, the new Attorney General issued a memo on her first day
ordering line prosecutors to look into potential criminal investigations of companies and institutions with DEIA policies, while the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia has already threatened Georgetown University over this, right? That's where the Supreme Court comes in. Are you ready to try to fit this thing in? The court has before it a low-profile case, and here's the pronunciation problem. Kousisis, Kousisis, Kousisis versus United States. That case could, if it goes the federal government's way, and remember the federal government's the bad guys in this situation, if they may offer the federal government a plausible path to criminally threaten some number of individuals and entities that maintain DEIA policies and practices. Kousisis involves a question about the meaning of the federal criminal laws against wire fraud and mail fraud. What? Those laws, as their name suggests, generally prohibit using means of wire or mail to engage in fraud. But what does it mean to engage in fraud? These guys call everything fraud, right? In Kousisis, the allegation is that a contractor who partnered with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation engaged in fraud by misrepresenting that the contractor would subcontract with minority-owned businesses. They were supposed to do that, and apparently they didn't. Is that a problem? The federal government says that's a fraud, whereas the defendant says it's not, because that term in the contract requiring subcontracts with minority-owned businesses did not have any economic value. That is, it didn't affect the price of the contract. Oh boy, it's my law and economics people in this one. The upshot of this that you're supposed to look out for is, will they give license to this federal government, Trump's federal government, to say DEI is de facto fraud?
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I don't know. I just wanted to give you indigestion for the rest of the weekend by bringing that to your attention. It's coming, so I wanted you to be aware of it. Despite the other things I could have told you about, which is that like Elon sucks, even worse than before. However, there's still important news we didn't get to. That's why there's the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and Justice Putnam. We'll see you next week.